I feel like I'm on a bit of a lean, Holly. All right. Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do on Sundays. You can ask gardening questions down below this video, and I'll pick from those each week. I have like 22 or something I wrote down from last week, and there's a lot. There's just a ton. So thank you guys for participating, and it's a lot of great questions. Holly's right here on here beside me. I haven't put up as many videos this week. Holly had a rough week. She's for those of you who don't know, this Husky mix who's been in probably, I bet there's 1,300 and some videos on the channel, maybe, I don't know how many, 1,300, I think. She's probably been in 500 of them. Wouldn't surprise me if that's the number she's been in. Sometimes I'll go 2 videos without her in it and people start asking about her. She had a rough week, and she's got her thyroids on her neck, thyroid glands on her neck have pretty large masses on them. So she's going to a specialist this next week. Got all kinds of blood work done this week, and nothing was elevated, so it doesn't seem like they're having a giant negative impact on her so far. But she struggled in a couple other ways this week, and so she's been to the vet, and now she'll be going to another specialist this week. But anyway, 14-year-old dog stuff. And I know people, watch the channel probably as much for her in the background of the videos, doing whatever the heck she's doing. It always surprises me when I'm editing the video that, oh, I didn't realize she was behind me the whole time I was filming that. But anyway, so that cut into the week a bit, which I don't mind at all. I'll do. This dog has been just the best dog ever. And her first 7 or 8 years of her life were spent at the nursery. So she had this big, giant open space. And then she was the garden center dog for a little while. And people stopped just to see her at my garden center in Johnston County. And then, of course, at the old house. And then here, she's been in just so many videos that you guys have seen. So anyway, enough about that. Let's see. I did put up a couple pruning videos this week and a prepping for mulch video, just showing edging and pruning and just kind of some of the prep we do to get ready for mulching. And so let's see. Let's jump into some questions. Again, I think there's like 22 or so. So somebody wanted a deer-resistant large conifer, and I've gotten to the point where I just don't like to recommend anything to do with deer, because deer can destroy things. Even things they don't want to eat, they can still figure out ways to destroy them by rubbing on them, and So I've kind of gotten out of the deer recommendation business, except for over on that Learn to Garden video series. I am putting up some deer. I'm putting up some list of some kind of known deer-proof plants, and then some deer-resistant plant list over there. So that, those lists, I'm in the process of making those lists for that channel. That information for purchasing that is down below. But for the most part on the videos now, I've stopped mentioning it as much, because almost everybody's got an example of a deer eating the thing that people told them that deer won't eat. And so, a hungry deer will at least sample something. And if you're planting something small and new, it doesn't take much browsing. Maybe it's the deer figuring out they don't like it. But, if you have 6 of them in a herd together and they all take a sample of this little plant to find out, oh, we don't really like this, they've cut it in half, right? So there's that as well. But with that said, junipers and cryptomeria, this person was in the South, and so I typically on large growing conifers, what they were trying to find. Like emerald arborvitae, I don't know if you guys have seen, deer will eat the bottom of them up and turn them into these weird looking plants. It's actually kind of, if you didn't know better, you'd think the plants were done that way on purpose. But they'll eat them up to the height that they can eat them. Cryptomeria and junipers, like juniper, one of the junipers being an eastern red cedar, like Juniperus virginiana, which is our eastern red cedar. That's a good choice. And then, of course, any cryptomeria. But again, they may rub them. Keep that in mind. It doesn't mean, even if they don't want to eat them, doesn't mean that they won't do some damage to them anyway. Okay, so somebody asked about organic fertilizer doesn't start working until the soil temperature is like 60 degrees, and that is true. It has to be warmer. That's the beauty of organic. So if I use a synthetic fertilizer, let's say I use a synthetic fertilizer in September, that synthetic fertilizer will just continue to release as long as it can release. It'll just keep releasing, and it would force the growth on your plants right through the fall and into early winter potentially. Whereas if you can use an organic fertilizer whenever, and it won't work when the soil temperature is cool, so it will let your plants rest when they're supposed to rest, because it's basically just feeding the microbes and letting the microbes feed the plants. And then they wanted to know if it's just a waste of time or money to put it out when the temperature is not up that high. I put it out in advance of me mulching here in the spring, and so it's trapped in those layers, so it's not going anywhere. But if you were throwing your organic fertilizer out on a slope, right, and it was a month and a half before your soil temperature was going to be warm enough for it to be used, maybe you would lose a little bit of it, between then. So that might be something to think through, that you would use it a little bit later, if you were top dressing with it and it had the potential to erode in some way. But if it doesn't have the potential to erode, it'll just sit there. It'll be there when the soil microbes need to feed on it. And I want it there as they're waking up, and it's there. So it is a great question. But again, it's another one of those advantages to organic fertilizer, is that it just flat out doesn't work at the time of year that you don't want it to work. So it's just because the soil life kind of goes to sleep as the soil temperature lowers, and at the same exact time your plants need to be going to sleep. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked about my top public gardens. They wanted to know my top 3 favorite public gardens, and it'd be hard to narrow it down to 3. I think if you were going to visit public gardens, Philadelphia should be near the top of your list, and you should definitely go to Chanticleer, and you should definitely go to Longwood. I mean, those 2. And then there are a lot of other gardens around the city of Philadelphia. I think Philadelphia is like garden central in the United States, really. There's so many incredible public gardens, and Chanticleer and Longwood are 2 of the top probably 10 gardens in America. So you have those 2 that are close together. The New York Botanic Garden, off the chains. The U.S. Botanic Garden's in Washington, D.C., and it's a little smaller because it's in the mall, but it is quite, it's beautiful, and of course you get to see it's part of the bigger draw of what of why you would go to Washington. It's right in front of the Capitol, right just to the right of the Capitol if you're looking down the lawn, and it's really beautiful in the corner. But again, and then backing up, the New York Botanic Garden, definitely near the top of my list. Missouri Botanic Garden is one of the tops in America, and I think people might not think as Missouri would be that, but that garden absolutely is off the chains. We went to Chicago last summer, the Chicago Botanic Garden. If I was going to do the big botanic gardens, Chicago, Atlanta, and San Francisco might be my three favorites. And then Lewis Ginter in Richmond. Oh my gosh, that garden's off the chains. And then let's see, the Portland Japanese Garden for sure. The Dallas Botanic Garden. Oh my gosh, that place is awesome. And I'm probably going to leave something out there, but San Francisco Botanic Garden's like fantasy land. So many, they can grow so many things in San Francisco, just because it doesn't get very hot and it doesn't get very cold. So it's an interesting place where you can grow all kinds of, weird tropic things mixed with, temperate things in the same space. So I really like that one. But anyway, that's not three, but those are probably some of my bigger go-tos, and I know I've just left off some giant. Fairchild in Miami, the Tropical Garden in Miami. Oh my gosh, that place is fantastic. If you're doing this tour in summer, though, that one might be a little hot. I would do that one in the spring or the fall for sure. But the Fairchild, I think, is what that one is called in Miami. But that's a good one as well. Okay, so somebody asked when to divide hellebores. Typically, going into fall is the best time is when you can still see them later in the fall. They're pretty easy to dig up. A lot of times you just don't, if you're dividing them to have more, in other areas, that makes sense. But if you're just trying to make that clump larger, it'll just kind of get larger over some period of time. But Fall is the time to, early fall is the time to do it. That's true with a lot of perennials. While they're starting to go to sleep, but you can still see them, is the best time to do it. Once they've gone completely dormant under the ground, it's a little hard to find them, although hellebores stay up through the winter. But a lot of your other things, like a hosta being an example of that, really easy in early October to find them and dig them up and divide them and plant them right back into the ground. So somebody has, they've got a bed that's been raised just because they used cardboard and then mulch and other materials, compost, and the bed ended up higher over adding all this material to it. Would it end up being drier? No, not once the plants are in and established. All that stuff will just kind of, settle a bit over time. And the plants are pretty good at rooting down and out where they need to go. And all the stuff you've put down, they'll easily be able to root down to the soil down below it. One thing I'll say, though, using cardboard boxes is it can create some dry, very dry conditions. Cardboard can be hard to wet at times, and so it can create a dry socket between your the top and the bottom. So where your soil microbes need to be moist all the time, that cardboard can again create a dry socket between the rain trying to get through the cardboard and those microbes down below. Eventually that goes away because the cardboard breaks down, but any barrier between your mulch that's staying moist up here on top and the soil down below can create a dry socket. So that can be ground cover cloth or cardboard or anything. I know everybody's all in on putting down cardboard boxes. Any barrier you put down between the soil and your mulch is going to create an issue. With the cardboard, of course, it's temporary because it eventually breaks down. Let's see. Somebody asked if they can grow Arizona cypress in Houston. I know up in central Texas you can. I don't know that far south if you can or not. You would, again, probably call your extension agent in the Houston area and see. If you're not seeing them, it's a plant that really does thrive in hot, dry conditions. And if you're not seeing them in Houston, then probably not. It's not, it's not an inexpensive plant because it's compared to other things. They're not super expensive. So if you wanted to try one and test the limits of it, it's probably one that you could do because it's not patented. It's not in some special pod. It's just, it's a fast growing conifer that should be reasonably priced. If you wanted to just get one and try it, you wouldn't break the bank. If you think you're close to the area where you can grow it. So somebody has drip irrigation, and they wanted to know if they can just put the quarter-inch tube, which is the super fine tube, like you would put up into a container. And I've shown, I've got drip irrigation videos on the channel. And then they've got their half-inch drip tube running through the bed on the ground, and they just want to put the quarter-inch tubes up into something else. Want to know if you can attach the quarter-inch tube to the smaller tube, or does it have to go to a main line? Like a main central, imagine you have a main central line running through a bed. This is like a half-inch line. And then you have these little other half-inch lines coming off that have drippers in them where the water's going into your plants. And then you want to put quarter-inch line going up into pots. Okay, I wanted to know if the quarter-inch line could just come off the side branches. Yes, that's not a problem. Everything to do with drip irrigation comes down to how much water pressure you have combined with your water volume. And if you go to a place that actually specializes in irrigation, you have to figure out how many gallons of water per minute you get out of the faucet combined with your PSI. Those two things together, those two pieces of information, determine how much line you can run out into your landscape off of each before you have to divide it into zones, before you have to divide half the yard into zone 1 and half the garden into zone 2 or whatever. But those two pieces of information you need to know if you have a big system. If you have a tiny little system, you can probably don't need to know all this. But if you're running a big drip irrigation system, you need to know how many gallons per minute your faucet gets if you're attaching it to a faucet, and the PSI. And again, those two pieces of information, a place that sells irrigation supplies can tell you how much line you can run out into your landscape, whether it's 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch or whatever it is. And then it can all be attached together, however the heck you want to attach it together, as some sort of spaghetti thing. Somebody's up in that Ohio, near that Ohio train disaster up there, and wanted to know if there's a place you can get toxic chemicals tested for soil. Yeah, just Google that. There are labs that can test for contaminants in your soil as part of soil test, just a more detailed soil test. But you would just Google that. They're done by mail, so they would send you however the collection thing, and then you send it back to them. Somebody asked me my thoughts about rotating different types of mulch. I've talked about this in the past. I'm rotating mulches out here right now. I've got leaves in the background that don't look great, but in a week or two they will look great because I'm putting some triple shredded hardwood mulch over top of them. But I'm also cutting up my perennials that from last year. I'm chipping up larger limbs. That'll be in a video this week, just chipping up all the stuff I've been cutting off these plants in these videos. And I use that material. So I'm using lots of mulches anyway. But if you're just talking about, I mulch once or twice a year and I want to rotate, should I rotate materials? If one starts to build up and it's not breaking down very quickly, typically I'll pine straw. Here in the South, we can get pine straw reasonably priced, not as reasonable as it used to be, but reasonably priced pine straw. And I'll use pine straw one time just to wait for my hardwood mulch and all this other leaves and everything to break down some, because I just, it can get thicker and thicker and thicker over time. So that's the only reason I ever rotate, is I'll rotate to pine straw temporarily because pine straw breathes a little better. It's not as dense of a mat on top of it. It also doesn't prevent weeds probably quite as well, but it does hold together well if you have slopes. So it's good for that purpose. But that's the only reason that I ever rotate, is if my mulch is starting to get too thick, I'll use pine straw. But then again, my rotation is I got all kinds of stuff out here I'm using as mulch. I'm trying to feed this. We want as many species in this garden as possible, and so when I say that, you're thinking about ground covers. Immediately, what comes to your mind is my annual flowers and my perennials and my ground covers and my shrubs and my trees. I'm actually more talking about soil biodiversity. I mean, just as many species of beneficial bacteria and beneficial fungi as I can. Some of them eat leaves. Some of them eat chunkier material. Some of them break things down at the very last minute down in the humus layer and make those things available. Make those nutrients available for the plants. Some of them are attached to the roots of my plants, like mycorrhizal fungi, and they're bringing nutrients and water to the plant. So these layers of different materials that I'm adding to the soil are probably feeding different sets of beneficial things. So, again, that's why I'm using leaves and my cut up perennials and and I'm also putting the same nutrients back on the plant's using a set of nutrients, that maybe one of these shrubs uses more potassium or more calcium or more boron or whatever. Some plants take different nutrients. So I'm just going to give it right back to them, and not take it off the property and have the city grind it up and then buy it back. Lots of different things being applied to the topsoil. And then you can use some sort of decorative mulch over that to have that, crispy garden look that you want. But it doesn't take much at that point. I'm just going to put a very thin layer of the more decorative mulch. Okay, that was a lot of words, right? Let's see. Somebody ordered plants from Plants by Mail, and they're in zone 8B. They wanted to know if the plants should be acclimated to the outside. Plants by Mail, they're down in Loxley, Alabama, which is probably 8B or 9A there. Probably 8B. So you're probably in the same zone as them. So I'm thinking probably not. If you do, I've got links down below for Plants by Mail for different sections. If you do buy from one of those links, I get a very small portion of the sale. But if you are buying plants from them this spring, I think you're in the same zone as them, so you wouldn't have to acclimate the plants. And what they mean by that is you might pull them out of the box and they have a little bit of growth on them, because they're in a more southern area. So somebody pulling that plant out of a box in zone 6 might want to acclimate the plant, meaning not plant it right away if it's covered in new growth, because you can still get some frost and freezes. But again, you're in the same zone as them, so I think whatever that plant's doing outside, they're not growing them in greenhouses down there. They're outside. I've been down to their facility. They're outside their space. They don't even have to cover very much down there. Probably did back in December when we had that freeze, but other than that, they probably don't even have to cover. So the plants are acclimated outside to your 8B area, not to somebody's 6B area. So yeah, for you, you'd want to either order later in the spring from them in zone 6, or you would get the plant, enjoy the flowers on it, keep it in your garage on nights when it's cold, and then put it in the ground later. Okay, somebody asked about, they have a Camellia japonica that's 10 feet tall, got pretty badly damaged from the cold back in December, wanted to know if they could hard prune it. Yeah, you can definitely hard prune it. I guess if you're here in my area, I would go ahead and do it. You can go ahead and do it if you want to. I will tell you, hard pruning old camellias, surprisingly, they come back from it quite well. It may take a couple years for that thing to look normal and get back to blooming. They're they're just slow in general. But I've had a neighbor over here that I thought just completely butchered his Camellia sasanquas maybe 3 years ago. And I mean, cut 8 foot tall sasanquas down to 3 feet tall. And I was, they're doomed. 2 years later, they looked fantastic, but it was 2 full years. Okay, somebody asked, okay, so they got area along the road with boxwoods planted, and dogs come along and pee on the boxwoods. They wanted to know if there was something that would, they've got a little space to plant something smaller, wanted to know if there was something that would repel the dogs from peeing. No, I don't think there's anything that would actually repel them, but you can use something that's very, very salt tolerant as the strip, and just say, the dogs are gonna pee here, and that's that, and I just need to put something out where they don't target my boxwoods, but it's whatever is planted is not damaged. And liriope is probably right at the top of that list. I don't recommend liriope very often, just because, not because I dislike it, it's just so much of it is planted. But you can get an interesting liriope, an interesting variegated liriope. You don't have to just get the green liriope or the variegated liriope. You can get, there are other interesting ones. But liriope is a good choice for the dog to just be able to pee on it for the next 30 years and not affect it at all. And it won't affect your life in any way. Once a year, you'll go out and cut that down, and it'll keep the urine from actually going onto your boxwoods. That's probably the best recommendation. There's some other plants too, but Holly absolutely loves liriope. Make sure it's liriope muscari, Muscari, and not liriope spicata. Spicata is the spreading one. You don't want the spreading one. It can be a real headache to get rid of in the future. Muscari is a clumping liriope, and the clump will get bigger each year, but it's a clump that you can pop out of the ground and divide and make smaller. Pretty simple compared to spicata. Let's see, somebody's tearing out their knockout roses. They want to know if they should prep the holes for new plants. My concern always on when you dig something out of the ground and you leave that little depression, if you came back in there and filled that up with organic material, so envision 3 or 4 inches, because it's probably a little pancake you created, right? Because most of the roots are up pretty shallow. If you come in and fill that little pancake up with organic material, water's going to run in there. And so the next plant you plant in there is going to be potentially drowned, overloved. Okay, so typically what I'll do is I'll feather the soil in the area back into that hole some. So I'll go through and break up. If I had, let's say I had 3 knockout roses in a row, or 3 roses in a row, and they got dug out. So I have these 3 little depressions. I'll take that whole area and just kind of break it up some and smooth the whole area back flat. And then I'll add some organic material maybe on top of that gets mixed in with the next plants. But what I want you to do is feather all that soil back to get the whole area kind of flat again. If you don't do that, those depressions can be spots where plants don't thrive. You end up with bad bacteria and bad fungi because of the staying too wet. So that's what happens with depressions, typically, where the depressions are full of organic material. Okay, let's see. Somebody wanted, they got a maple that's diseased, and they're way up in they're up in zone 5. They got a maple that's diseased in the strip along the road, and wanted to a recommendation for, trees. I mean, not a lot of trees are going to thrive forever, in those little narrow spaces. We have these oaks in this neighborhood that are planted in those, between the sidewalk and the road. And they're 80 some years old now, and they're beautiful, but man, what a life to be stuck in the middle. I would think about, I love lindens, so an American linden or little leaf linden, or a hornbeam, are two native trees that would do okay. There's a time limit, obviously, but the time limit is probably longer than we're going to be around to see it. But those would be two of my choices for street trees. Let's see, in zone 5. So somebody got 80 liatris, and they've in a box this time of year. And again, I'm going to have a jump start video pretty soon, jump starting a lot of my corms and bulbs and tropical things, and getting them up and going before spring, so they've got some growth on them already. They got a box that had 80 liatris. They only planted 40 of them. They wanted to know if they could store the other 40. No, not really. You probably just want to give them to a neighbor, or do something else with them, or put them as container plants or whatever. Any bulb or corm or bulb-like thing, it doesn't matter what it is. Any bulb-like thing that's been dug out of the ground, so that can be dahlias or elephant ears or tulips or daffodils or onions or garlic or anything that's bulb-like under the ground, that you plant under the ground. When it comes out of the ground and it's being sold at the store, it's in the process of dying. There's water in that bulb and it's drying out, okay? And so some things will last longer than others, but it is in the process of dying, and so you want to get it. I think you can go a little while, but if you were thinking about storing them till next year, no, they need to go in the soil and grow during the growing season. But keep that in mind. Any bulb you buy, the day it got dug out of the ground, whether it got dug out of the ground in the Netherlands or got dug out of the ground in Florida or California or wherever the heck it came from, it started dying the minute it came out of the ground, and it needed to be back in the ground at the appropriate time it goes in the ground. Okay, let's see. So somebody asked me about hiring an arborist, and the person that came and recommended some tree trimming is not a certified arborist. Honestly, I just don't know much. Somebody not being a certified arborist, the person in your area who might be the best arborist, who might have the most knowledge, might not be a certified arborist. It might not be, or it could be the complete opposite, that this person knows absolutely nothing. I think you probably need to have, look online for reviews. People review anything now, and see if there's reviews for this person. There are some very professional people in the Raleigh area. It would be easy to find that out, who they are, using, get to work on the computer and make sure, before you have somebody come in and hacking on your trees, that they have some knowledge of it. I don't know that being certified, they could have more experience at it than someone who is. I don't really know. I'm a North Carolina certified landscape contractor, and I went through some testing, and every single year I have to take additional classes and I have to do additional steps to keep my certification. And I decided, even back when I kind of sold off my maintenance contracts and got out of landscaping, that I would continue to maintain it just in case I ever wanted it again. So I jumped through a lot of hoops every year to do this, and there is some professionalism involved in that certification. Again, I don't know about the arborist certification. I haven't taken it. I'm assuming it's similar. that they have to do some ongoing education every year, and that, that kind of thing. So I'm chasing points all year long, every year, trying to make sure that at the end of the year that I have enough points, and and then I pay a fee. Unfortunately, in the landscape profession, anybody with a pickup and a shovel and a rake can call themselves a landscaper. And some of those people, again, may have a tremendous amount of experience and are very professional and are great. And then some of them know literally nothing or next to nothing and don't want to know anything. They're just trying to chase a dollar every day. And then there's probably people who are certified landscape contractors like myself who also fit those two descriptions. So again, I think reviews of people and getting a neighbor's recommendation, are always the best way to go, regardless of it picking any service or business. That was a lot of words for that, right? Okay. So somebody asked about pulling weeds versus using a hoe, some sort of hoe to get them out, which is better. If you really do, some weeds you can just decapitate with the hoe. Just take the top foliage off and the weed will kind of die. Some, the roots are able to very quickly, like as an example, if you just scrape Bermuda grass off with a hoe, the roots are just going to pop right back up. Some things like henbit or chickweed, which are very aggressive garden weeds, I find that if you decapitate them with the hoe, most of the time it kills them for that season. And there's plenty of seed there, they'll be back. But there's some things that are easier to decapitate. Some of the grassy weeds almost all have enough storage down below the ground that they're going to come back up. So if you're looking at a grass, you probably need to get as much of the roots out of the ground as you can. If you're looking at broadleaf, roundish leaf things, those things are probably can be decapitated with the hoe and come back less likely. But again, hand pulling them and trying to get as much of the grass. But see, the problem is for me, I just don't have enough time. So I just take the hoe and I just go crazy through a bed and get as much as I can. And then I mulch over it, and if something pops back up through, I'll deal with it at that time. Holly decided it was time to go inside. The last question for this week was several people asked questions about soil test this week. So somebody got a soil test and their nitrogen is a little bit low. Nitrogen, when you buy fertilizer, nitrogen is the first number in the fertilizer. So again, I talked about 10, 10, 10 last week. So that, 10% of the weight of that bag is nitrogen. 10%, that's the first number in the fertilizer. The middle number is phosphorus, and so 10% of the bag is phosphorus, and then the last number is potassium, so 10% of the bag is potassium. And then there'll be micronutrients, nutrients that are needed in less quantities. So you have the macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and then the micronutrients, which there are 20-some that are vital for plant life. And there's probably things that are vital for plant life that we have no idea because we just don't know everything, right? So they got a soil test, their nitrogen is low. Nitrogen is changeable by the time of year you take the test, even the time of day you take the test, and all kinds of things. And so nitrogen is not the one that I look at the soil test and have any thoughts about whatsoever, because literally if I took another soil test today, the nitrogen reading would be different than it was that day that I took it. Phosphorus and potassium are pretty set levels. Another person gets a soil test done, they got new construction. First thing they do is take a soil test, send it off, come back, and it's got very low phosphorus, very low potassium. Critically low is what it said on a few different things. What would you do? I would still start the exact same way I talk about all the time, which is get the ground covered, get some wood chips if you can get them. Some sort of humus or compost, on top of the soil, whatever you can do to get, if you can't get wood chips, get compost. Put some sort of humus or compost layer and then mulch it. Get the soil microbes coming to life, get everything coming to life, and then take a soil test. That's the order that I would do these things in. Most of these plants don't need the optimum amount of phosphorus. You're not growing corn. So you're not trying to produce 200 bushels of, 200 and whatever bushels of corn per acre or anything like that. You don't need everything to be optimum to grow a spirea, okay? Or, you know, a clayera, or, you know, whatever plant that you're trying to grow. Most things will have enough. And if there's any out there in the soil, then, you know, getting those beneficial fungi, beneficial bacteria alive, they're the things that will bring those nutrients to your plants. And they're the most important thing to have regardless. So, you know, get those things, you know, coming back to life, get the soil coming back to life, get the earthworms to move back in, and get the soil, you know, the compaction from the, you know, from construction, you know, that compaction will ease up, you know, when the foot traffic's off of it. So it'll take a little bit of time for that ultra compacted soil, but it will spring back some over the years. And so getting those things done, and then you can take a soil test, and if then something's critically low, maybe you add that particular thing at that time. But I think you'll probably find that if you can get the ground covered, get these things coming back to life, and then you're using like an organic fertilizer once a season, or maybe you use it twice the first season, you know, which it'll say on the bag, you know, how often to use it. I use it less than any recommendation. Maybe you use the recommended level of that organic fertilizer, and it'll have some of those, most of those things that you're critically low in, and you'll just add them back, you know, a little bit at the time through that organic fertilizer. But I would not go out and try to make the perfect soil on a soil test, because I will say, if I got a soil test back and I was low on a lot of things, I'd go, yes. And you know why? Because the worst case scenario is to be too high in those things. So you know that you can't, it's hard to remove them, right? You know, you have to make crazy decisions to remove salts and to remove high levels of metals that might damage, you know, cause some sort of issues with your plants. Or, you know, you won't want to grow tomatoes if you have heavy metals in the soil and, you know, you're eating them, that kind of thing. So celebrate the fact, trust me, celebrate the fact that you're low on things and not ridiculously high, like it wasn't a farm that dumped massive amounts of something out there that, you know, basically turns your soil toxic in some way. So, but again, start from the basics, use some organic fertilizer, you know, just get started, and then take you can retake that soil test at some point. And I think you'll find that most of those things have adequate amounts. The plants are probably going to do okay, regardless, without getting in there and trying to be so exacting that you end up putting out too much of something, and too much of something might bind up something else and start causing real problems that you know, having something that's too high can cause real problems. So there you go. Thank you guys for asking questions, and ask gardening questions down below. And I'll be back next week. There should be a couple videos going up on the Learn to Garden video series during the week. If you are signed up for the Learn to Garden video series, I send out an email each week, and it comes from the HortTube email address. Make sure, look through, if you're not getting that, or if you haven't gotten that email, make sure that, you know, it's not in your junk mail or something, because when I put a video up on that, you're alerted that that's happening. Thanks for watching.